Welcome back to Fireside Chats. I'm here with SoPro founders Rob and Ryan, and this time we're speaking about messaging and personalisation. So if you've ever tried to send emails at scale, you'll know how important personalisation is. And I think our co-founders might know a little bit about the subject. So what is it, about 80 million emails we've sent now in our history?
87-ish, something like that.
87-ish.
Who's counting?
And how has email personalisation changed over the last 5 years or so?
I think so. I mean, it's changed a lot. So the fundamentals of why it's done haven't necessarily changed. The point of sending an email is that it should be. It's not that it should look like a one-to-one email. It should be as close to a one-to-one email as possible. And that was always quite difficult to do. Before AI and automation tools. There was quite a bit of manual work going in. Yes, you could mention someone's name, their company name. It was always good to drop in a couple of relevant case studies as well. Personalisation shouldn't just be for the sake of it. It's actually, we've got case studies in your industry, so that email's been personalised for you. And some of those are really the most powerful examples of how personalisation works. Well, with AI, a lot of the things that previously would only have been able to be done by people have become way, way, way more accessible. And there's really good and bad examples of it. I'm sure everyone's received emails where it's like, oh, I noticed you went to Yale University. Mm-hmm. Totally irrelevant. It's clearly something that's looked at your LinkedIn profile and inserted that in there. That's crap personalisation. However, if really succinct and detailed information is fed in about what you're offering and what the potential prospect company might be looking for, then it's possible to weave some really, really clever paragraphs about the exact pain points you can be able to solve, which is personalisation, when done well, better than maybe someone could do themselves.
Yeah, there's so much you could say about personalisation. I think obviously coming at this from a perspective of somebody that knows a lot more about personalisation and messaging than Rob. So obviously you start with you've got data points, and in the old days it was insertions based, right? So whatever you've got in your database you can drop in as a field. Now with AI you've got an iteration on that, which is AI appended or even statements that you could produce about somebody. If you feed in enough information about their scenario, you could have just an example section that you can slot into an email. But actually we've got this sort of next level available to us now, where actually if you feed enough data points into OpenAI as an example, or any of the LLMs as a messaging brief, you can get a completely tailored, literally from the words that you're using to the style, the size, if the messaging engine knows that the recipient is a CEO and likely going to be pretty time poor, and actually you're going to be better off with 2 lines and straight to a CTA, that's what you're going to get. And the ability to feed that huge amount of context into a brief and have every single message generated completely custom for every single prospect, that's where performance is coming from today. It works on a few levels. One, the first one is obviously, from a recipient's perspective, you're just getting a better message, a better experience. But even from things like a deliverability point of view, if you take the older versions of messaging where you'd have variables being inserted, broadly speaking, you've got a campaign level template which looks pretty much the same for most recipients, just with a few points that are slightly different or custom to them. And now you've got completely flip that on its head. You've got a totally different type of message for every single prospect, and that's what's working today.
What's the need for hyper-personalisation? Why is it so important in emails and in outreach?
I think it's really down to how someone is reading and receiving that message, and people's behaviours change all the time, and there's so many more emails being received a day. People's inboxes are far, far busier, and so you get a few seconds before someone decides whether or not to read their email, and people have become really, really hypersensitive to marketing. You can tell often from a subject line, but definitely from the first line if something is a generic mass email. The standard, I just want to introduce, straight away goes in the bin, doesn't get read. And so what that personalisation does, if done well, is make it look like actually there is a one-to-one tailored message from someone who understands not only what your challenges might be, but has something that genuinely could solve them. So it really comes back to kind of being able to build a good audience as well. Having the best message to the wrong person isn't going to work. Knowing the right time, hitting the best message at the wrong time still isn't going to work. But it's if you have got all of those elements, it can work really well. And it can also be overused though. And it's not just about personalisation for the sake of it, because that same kind of behaviour change that makes people hypersensitive to marketing is really clearly happening in the world of AI as well. And people can spot unnecessarily verbose and GPT generated content almost subconsciously these days, and those kind of emails can just as rapidly be put in the bin or spam and tank your deliverability in exactly the same way as an old standard templated email can.
I think with great power comes great responsibility as well. You've got this ability to personalise to probably a degree now that is way beyond your typical human's ability to connect dots and make kind of clever references and stuff like that. So some examples of where it's working really well. We're plugging in AI-based assessment of a recipient's likely pain points, right, based on the job title. They're a CTO, a mid-sized European financial institution, for example. So, and we can make assumptions that they're probably challenged with, X, Y, and Z, and then pulling out those just without even needing to specify beyond instructing it to do so. It will pull out the right elements of the proposition to put forward to them, right? That's an example of it working really well. We've had to dial back in our own personalisation. Some of the early testing that we did was, make this as personalised as possible, and we were getting kind of amazing references. Some of them were quite hilarious, some of them were offensive.
Colloquialisms and stereotypes.
Yeah, there was
all over the shop.
The recipient might be in country X or country Y, and it would be somehow making a connection with certain folklore there, and
so it can actually work as a bit of a hindrance if it's too personalised.
It's just kind of beyond the human capability, and sort of obviously so, and that then kind of it scuppers you from that perspective. I think what that taught us was personalisation is important, but humanisation is more important. That comes first, and if you lose that, you've lost everything. So you've got to maintain that. It has to be a one-to-one email.
I saw an example. This wasn't one of ours, and it was an email that had been sent to someone, and his Facebook profile picture was from his wedding. It was him with, I think, sort of part of the wedding party, smoking a cigar. And they made reference to his love of cigars and how much they liked that photo in an outbound prospecting email, which was just so out of place and odd.
Yeah.
But it was super personalised.
Yeah.
Not great.
So there's a perfect middle ground to personalisation that's professional and
Well, it's humanisation. Right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Interesting.
would you do that as a human?
Yeah.
If you did, you'd be weird.
Yeah. So can salespeople just write an email using ChatGPT? Would you recommend that?
No. Doesn't
Why
work.
not?
It'll be terrible.
Yeah, if you take a typical email that would go out within one of our campaigns, it would probably have 6, 7, 8 lines, pretty small amount of text. But the actual prompt, the brief that goes into that, if you were to put it into A4 pages, it would be several pages long. There's hundreds of data points about the recipient company, about the recipient individual, website description, summarised. You've got a whole set of structural instructions right the way through to example CTAs, example good messages, language and regionalisation, tone of voice, and all of these things can be specific to any given organisation. There's not just one sort of set of settings that works as well. So,
but I think the important part, just to jump in as to why, and I'll do it back, is that LLMs and GPTs are they're very, very good at summarising information that they're given. And but as soon as you kind of start relying on information that they've already got, it just doesn't work.
Right.
And so the structure and the volume and the accuracy of that information is essential. You don't feed them that, then it's never going to be good.
Yeah, pretty much got to the end of everything that goes into a message. So the point is, lots in, small amount out, but it's very refined, that process. And if you just ask it to write you an email, you're not going to get something that really performs.
And I guess at the end of the day as well, our salespeople, and anyone's salespeople, they're good at selling, they're good at building relationships. They're not necessarily very good at engineering prompts in large language models. It's I mean, we see it as a job now. It genuinely is a really kind of nuanced skill to take. Anyone can give a simple instruction to ChatGPT or to Claude or any of the models, but to make it good is the same as anyone could write a short story, but not everyone could write a novel.
I'll give you some examples. So if you take the SoPro proposition, there's lots of things that you would probably mention. There's a long list of things that we do or we can do. Right the way through from kind of multi-channel outreach, everything that's involved in that sort of sourcing data, right the way through to being completely compliant. Right, completely compliant is very important, but it's quite difficult to sell on that. Right, when we first started, the brief that goes in describing the company, the proposition, the USPs, etc., included all of that information to start with, and we'd start to see messages that were being produced and going out leading with compliance, because it's just pulled a few of the right features and all of a sudden your response rates drop through the floor. You're trying to figure it out, and actually, the editing needs to be done there in the company description, in the campaign brief. There's it's things like that where iteration becomes the most important thing, and being able to, let's say you've got a complex large brief, to be able to spin a version of it, and sometimes you've got to look at 10 versions and see actually on balance they're coming out like this, or a bit too long, or a bit too informal, and you end up, rather than, because you don't edit messages when you're using AI to produce them, what you do is you try and steer the output by making tweaks to the prompt or the ingredients that are going in, the different data points, etc. So that's one example. We had in the early editions of our language and regionalisation, there were some really funny examples. We had messages that were queued to go out to recipients in Ireland, for example, chaser messages saying, top of the morning to you, I can only assume my last email was eaten by a leprechaun. It'd be great to get back in touch, or if you want to give me a shout back at it. And you can understand how it's kind of got there, and yes, there's a backstory for everything like that. There will be an instruction that says use local references to make it familiarise your text with your recipient, or just something like that, and then you realise that you can't just say something like that without putting a whole load of constraints around the boundaries within which you'd want it to operate. So you end up dialing back quite a bit from what you could do. Sometimes for safety like that, other times just because it looks like it's been written by a supercomputer. Just trying to get it to that. We've for years had this philosophy of, does it look like it was written on a train? You're pulling into a station, you want to quickly get in touch, just fire something off, and you'll have to grab a coffee with them next week. That kind of note has always been the type that performs, and that's because it's so human. So to get to that style is not easy. And
there's quite a bit of tech that goes behind that as well, because again, you can't expect salespeople to just type into GPT. So what actually happens? There is a prompt that gets put together, but ultimately there's this whole kind of middleware platform that sits behind it, which has a prompt at its heart, which is made up from many different data sources, but it has then a lot of guardrails around making sure specific words aren't mentioned, and then it has QA prompts that run over it, and checks for things like the leprechaun scenario and lots of other kind of scenarios that you just wouldn't want to exist, and just more come up, more goes into that process, and it really is this sort of multi-layered approach to ultimately producing this one message, and it's quite a long way away from the standard chat interface.
We're seeing generative messaging cropping up now, especially in 2024, much more recently. I know it's SoPro as well. What's the history behind generative messaging? Why are we using it now?
Well, it's just a logical evolution from insertions-based messaging, and it's made possible with AI. You know, most of the large LLMs now have an API access model, and then that enables you to send large requests at high volume that give you an output that you can plug into an email campaign. Really, it's a case of the technical infrastructure now is available, and that's what it enables. So it's a new, much better version of messaging, better delivery rates, far better performance, response rates and overall lead rate. So it's really blazing a trail and making a lot of sense to a lot of businesses now.
Rob, Ryan, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you on the next video.
Next time.